Welcome to Tai Chi, the way to radiant health. My name is Jeff Cote, and I am the Occidental Taoist. In this show, we're going to practice some Tai Chi and Qigong and other Taoist internal and meditative practices. These practices enjoy a long history throughout all of China, and I've had the great opportunity to study with some wonderful teachers, and I want to share that with you. In this episode of Tai Chi, the way to radiant health, we're going to go through a warm-up, all that we've learned so far. That includes the counterswing series, opening the upper and lower gates. And then we're going to move on to learning the functional elements of Tai Chi. We're going to learn an expanding sphere exercise, learning to do a proper weight shift according to Tai Chi principles, and a weight shift and waist turn. Then we're going to put all of that together to create coiling exercises number 1 and number 2. So we begin with our warm-up. Start feet roughly shoulder width apart and parallel. Relax the center line, get the pelvis underneath, stack the 3 dantians on top of each other. Stay soft and buoyant in the knees and hips. And we begin with just a gentle expansion and release back to the center. Just kind of centering into the body, letting our awareness move out and in, from the center out, and the outer edges of our awareness back into the center. And then we bounce. Bouncing expansion now. Just let your body relax. Become soft, relaxed, and natural. Use momentum. Feeling this expansion and release and the bounce. We're going to gather our awareness of all the forces involved, the force of gravity, our actions and intentions, and how that's playing out into momentum. And we're going to switch into a counterswing smoothly at the changeover point. Now you'll discover there's all sorts of variations here. The first variation I want to talk about is the head and neck. If you leave your head and neck forward, you begin to get a little bit more stretch in the trapezius and the muscles up here in the neck and shoulder. Okay. If you turn your head, it increases the rotation and you get a better stretch into the low back. I recommend going back and forth between them, sometimes doing this way with the head looking where you're going to increase the rotation, and then sometimes keeping your head straight forward and feeling how that rotation of the shoulder just can stretch the neck a little. And we move into forward and back, column swing, bouncing the legs. The first variation we're going to work with here is learning to turn the palms up and down rather than just neutral. And I want you to feel, this is not a rotation happening in just the wrist. This rotation begins in the shoulder. It's almost like I'm trying to pull the elbow in to push the arm forward. And then releasing it downward. We can also do the opposite. We can rotate the other way to bring the palm down in front. The shoulders rotate out, the elbows rotate out a little bit, and this begins to change the way the force and momentum moves through the shoulders and through the arms. And it's good to experiment and play around with all of this. Sometimes I'll go back and forth, one way, then the other. And from here, we're going to take and redirect that towards the center and the center line to move into the forward and back counterswing. Now, the forward and back counter column swing here is very similar to just the column swing in that we can turn the palms up, rotating from the shoulders. Now, if you're paying attention, you'll notice the waist participates in this. And we begin to work with something that I've not yet touched on, called the right and left channels. I'll introduce them here, but I'm not going to say too much about them. I just want you to see if you can feel the column on each side of the body that goes from the foot, through the leg, through the hip, into the torso, through the arm and shoulder to the hand. So if I were standing like this, there'd be like 2 columns. that go through the body. And so we work on rotating them. Notice as I look to my left, the right hip opens and the right shoulder opens, causing that whole column of the body, that whole right channel, to feel like it rotates open in the front. At the same time on the left, it's rotating in. As I turn towards it, this hip rotates in and this shoulder rotates in, and it feels like that left channel rotates this way. So they do this, back and forth. And again, we can rotate them the other way. So now, my right hip is rotating closed as I turn to the right. My right shoulder is rotating open. As I turn to my left, the right hip opens as the right shoulder closes. And the same thing happens on the other side. That begins to change again the way the force and momentum flows through the body. You'll feel different muscles feel like they get worked and stretched when you go this way versus this way. And more importantly, for our practice, we're going to start to learn to pay attention to those right and left channels and feel how they move back and forth, and how changing the rotation through the shoulder changes the feel in that side, and how we're directing the power of those right and left channels into action. Don't worry about it if it takes you a little while to start noticing all the little nuances here and being able to feel all of that. Sometimes I'll go back and forth. I'll go one way and then the other. 1, 2 one way, 1, 2 the other. Bring the hands to the center and relax. Hands, wrists, and fingers. Now we're doing opening the upper gates. The other way. Add in the elbows. The other way. And the arms, fingers together and out. And you'll find every time we do the warm-ups, we'll do them a little bit differently. Sometimes we'll do them faster, sometimes we do them slower, focusing on different things each time. There's a lot to pay attention to in the body and a lot to learn about your body and about the way it feels and how it moves. And it's best if we just get curious and explore. Opening and patting the shoulders. So here you can see I can go through these at different paces, and it changes the way the warm-up feels and what it does. Sometimes it's more about activating the blood circulation and chi circulation. Sometimes it's more about focusing on momentum and subtler forces. Next we have trunk twists, that turning of the waist back and forth. And again, this is just like the counter swing in that I can leave my head straight forward and that stretches the neck a little, or I can turn and look and it increases the rotation of the twist. Working my way up the torso. Patting the low back and shoulders. And over towards the thymus. Down the center line. And to the waist. And we have circling the daimai, or waist rotations. And the other way. Widen the feet a little bit, go to the hips. And the other way. Sometimes I go back and forth, just stretch those inguinal muscles. And then we shift here. Begin with some patting. Come down the leg. I usually friction rub the knees here as well. That way when I move to circling the knees, I've already done it. And we shift into one leg, rotating hip and ankle. And the other way. Other side. And the other way. Shake it out. Small circles with the knees. First one direction. And then the other way. And deep bends, feet stay flat on the ground. Shake out the legs. Reposition back out to shoulder width. Ankle rotations. The other way. Brushing the grass. The other direction. And back. Remember to extend that heel. The other way. And big circles, sinking and rising. And the other way. Shake it out and switch. Start with the ankle. The other way. Brushing the grass. The other way. And back. And the other way. Big circles. The other way. And shake it out. Take a moment to pause, gather the chi. And relax. That completes our warm-up. Now that we've completed our warm-up, we'll go into the instruction of the new section. In this part, we're going to actually discuss and learn about the functional movement, the basic functional movement from which all Tai Chi movements will spring, at least in our form. The first movement is called the expanding sphere, and we've kind of discussed it a little bit in the bouncing expansion we've done before. But one of the things I want to talk about here is something called the feeling image. We want to create an imaginal experience of what it would feel like for this image to be true. In this particular case, the image we're going to work with is an image of the center being a sphere of the center, the dantian, and it flows and expands through us, helping us to move and coordinate our action together, to get a feeling like our center is expanding out to the outer edges of the sphere of our personal space, and then moving back in. Now, this is truly a Qigong in the sense that it is a unification of a regulation of the body, a regulation of the breath, and a regulation of the mind. The regulation of the body is the coordinated timing and expansion. There are some other functional elements we want to talk about. When we first begin, our hands are going to be in front of our lower abdomen, or our dantian, fingers just gently facing each other, palms sort of facing each other. Knees and hips, as you can see, are slightly bent, and my center line is upright and relaxed. As I expand, the palms are going to push forward and up. You can see how they're rotating in. This is again like the working with the right and left channels in the counterswing series we talked about earlier. This is going to come from a rotational power from those right and left channels as I expand up and out. Then as I come out, those right and left channels are going to rotate inward a little to facilitate the expansion and then return. So as we expand, it comes up and out, and then down and in. Okay, that's the first element, is what the arms are doing. If you see from the side, they don't just go circularly up, they go forward and then out to the sides and then down. So we want to make sure we're not doing this like we were doing before, like we're coming up the center line, but we're coming forward and out and around and down. Trying to get a sense of this full spherical space that we occupy. Now, coordination of the breath is, as you can imagine, as you expand, you inhale. As you return, you exhale. Now, at the beginning, we want this to be what's known as a bellows breath, where the abdomen expands on the inhale. We feel like the breath comes down, presses the diaphragm down all the way to the dantian, and the dantian expands out to the front, the back, and pressing down to the pelvic floor. At the same time, we're going to gently support the pelvic floor through a gentle draw upward. So as we inhale, we feel an increased pressure in the dantian. That enhances the feeling of the power of expansion, and then a return, a compression of that dantian as the hands come back. And you'll notice I'm rising and sinking. As I expand, I press through the legs, and I'm trying to get from here to almost locked, but not quite, almost straight leg, but not quite, at the same time that my hands go from here to their maximum. So we want to time that so that all happens together. And then as we return back to that sunken, supported position here. So let's try that a few times. Tongue lightly touches the roof of the mouth. Breath moves in and out through the nose, breathing into the lower dantian. A nice, smooth, contiguous cycling of the breath. Nice and thin, remembering that we're calm and relaxed, centered and grounded, whole and complete, and alive and lively. Everything is activated. Excellent. That was a good basic expansion. That basic expanding sphere is an important element of the basic practice. So what we want to do now is we're going to work with this sense of expanding now to the right side and to the left side. And the reason why we're working with this is to get a feeling of the weight shift. The weight shift in Tai Chi is very important. It gives us our first real expression of yin and yang with the legs, and there's a functional aspect here that we have to pay attention to. We have to learn to identify which leg is the yin leg and which leg is the yang leg. Now, what do I mean by that? Yin is receptive, yang is expansive, in a basic sense. So a lot more qualities to both yin and yang than that. But here we can actually use that as the basic orientation. So if I'm shifting to my left side, my left leg is becoming receptive to allow it to bend and receive weight. At the same time, the relationship between my hip and the leg is expanding, so I'm pressing through my right leg. So I get this receiving left and expanding right. When we put it together, it feels like there's a power that flows this way from the ground up as I receive weight, and from my center to the ground on the right side. So it almost feels like it flows that way. Then when I go to the other side, I become receptive here and projective there. I'm pushing through that leg. This is a very important element, and they must be equalized in the transition. If I expand with more power or faster than I receive, then I push myself up on my tension. And you can see how this kind of unroots me. It gets me to float a little bit. That's something we want to avoid in Tai Chi. We want to get a sense of being able to stay sunken into the ground, almost like we're connected very powerfully, that centered and grounded condition. So as I press, I receive equally, in equal measure. Then as I press on this side, I receive on this side. So sometimes it's helpful to play with your arms like this as you're going through this, just because you get a sense of helping to direct those two forces, that press down here and receive up. Now, if we don't align ourselves properly so that we're pressing straight down, if I press at an angle, angularly too much, then what happens is I have to actually tighten this side of my body to compensate. And I'm fighting gravity in some way when I do that, because gravity is a vertical relationship with the ground. So I want to make sure my knees are open so that I can press from the knee straight into the foot, and I allow the hip to rotate open as I open, and then rotate closed as I close that side, back and forth. Now the other component to this is the hand part that we just did, but rather than doing both at the same time, what we're going to do is start with one hand, starting in the center. We're going to shift and expand to that side on the inhale. Then on the exhale, we're going to withdraw and come back all the way in. Expanding right, receiving left. Expanding right, receiving left. Expanding right, receiving left. Really paying attention to that yin-yang exchange in the legs. One leg receptive, the other leg expansive, alternating back and forth. Then we're going to do the same thing to the other side. So we start in the center, we shift over, inhale and expand. Exhale and return. Then we're going to try to do both together, where we kind of alternate. Now, when we did the expanding sphere, the arms did this rotation where the palms came up and down. We're not going to worry about that too much here. Here we really want to feel how there's a sense of expansion, both an expansion through the legs, but an expansion to the side as we fill ourselves. And we're still working with the sense of the sphere. There's still that aspect of the sphere expanding and returning. Okay? And at first, it's easy because it's only one side, but then you realize it's returning on one side while it's expanding on the other. So that's the expanding right and left. Now the last piece is a weight shift and waist turn. We're not going to do anything with the hands yet. I just want to focus on what happens in the legs in the ball and socket joint when we add in a waist turn to this weight shift that we've already done from the expanding right and left. So as I shift into one leg, I feel that sense of expansion and receptivity in the leg. But as I do so, I'm also going to rotate towards the direction I'm going. So I'm going to rotate to the right as I shift right. Now, it is important that you pay attention to that, because I have watched a lot of students when we first start. May start like that, where they rotate towards the leg they're moving into, but then after a few repetitions, they start doing this, where they're rotating away from the leg that they're moving into. You can see how I'm pointing in the wrong direction. What I want you to be doing is turning towards that leg, keeping the other leg open. You notice I don't collapse the leg, ever. I want these to stay open. So if you imagine you've got a big beach ball between your knees that's helping you hold those open, that will help. It will also help if you remember to keep your tailbone down and the pelvic floor directly below the center line and the Bai Hui point at the top of the head. That pelvic floor point, by the way, is called Hui Yin. So, as I work with this, I shift and turn to one side. Now, if I sort of imagined I had a little indicator or a pencil sticking out of my umbilicus, and I shift it and turn, you can see I turn about 30 degrees. And then I shift and turn the other way, and I turn about 30 degrees. Now, how much you can turn is dependent upon your hip flexibility, your leg strength, and your ability to direct those forces into the triangles of the feet. If you cannot, if you feel like you're fighting yourself to turn that far, don't force. Go up to where the edge of your tension is. And sometimes it's helpful to just hang out there for a second. Relax. Try to relax open a little bit more and see if that doesn't help. So we go back and forth with this weight shift and waist turn, just like so. Now eventually this starts to feel like, instead of just the straight up and down force, this starts to feel like a spiral force that moves down and twists, and a spiral force that receives and moves up and twists. So it begins to feel like this. Just like that. Just like there's a little twist happening as you go back and forth. And you can go slow or fast. Just get familiar with it. Play around with it. Because that weight shift and waist turn is the basis of the movement for the coiling exercises we're going to do. The expanding sphere and the weight shift helps us get the expression of that weight shift and waist turn into the arm. So we get our coiling exercise. So coiling exercise number 1 begins with the hand in front of the center. We're going to shift to the one side. Like if I'm got my right hand in front of me, I'm going to shift and turn to my left. And I'm going to begin my expansion from here. As I inhale and expand, that hand's going to come up and out as I shift and turn to the right. Then as I shift and turn to the left, it comes in and down and back to the center. Coiling up and out, and down and in. And again, at the beginning, we'll learn to do this with a nice relaxed bellows breath. We inhale on the expansion and exhale on the return. Then we switch hands. Again, we shift over to the other side, start here, hand in front of the center, and we expand up and out. And back and in. You notice my other hand I keep in my center, or near my center, to remind me that all my actions should come from here. I should feel like the center is expanding as it shifts and turns. And I'm trying to also pay attention to that receiving and expanding leg change. That's a lot to pay attention to for a beginner. So it's okay if you don't get it all at once. What you'll find is it's helpful to pay attention to one for a little while, like the expansion and receiving in the legs. And then it's helpful to play and pay attention to, play with, and give your attention to the expanding sphere. And relax. That's coiling exercise number 1 to each side. So coiling exercise number 2 is simply the reverse of coiling exercise number 1. Instead of expanding up and out with the hand, we're actually going to go down and out first, and then up and in. Okay? So that would be this version of an expanding sphere. So instead of this direction, we would go this direction. Your palms turn back and down and up and then in. So if you're practicing this as an expanding sphere, and you can do this a few times just to get the sense of the arm movement. And again, there's still the sense of that sphere expanding from the center, out, working with your movements, and then coming back in. Now we want to do that in conjunction with our waist turn and weight shift. So we start, again, the right hand starts in front of the center. This time I'm going to move to the right, and as I begin my expansion, I come down and away, and then up. Notice the knees stay open, body stays upright. It's tempting sometimes. I've watched a lot of people do this with their body as they're going. They're trying to get this feeling of flow and flowiness, but they end up disturbing their upright center. We want the chi to flow through us rather than move and disturb our balance. So we outreach and expand, and return to the center. Then we can do the same thing to the other side. So we start with the left hand in front of the center, moves down and away as we move left, and then up and out as we move right. And relax. Bring your feet together. Gather the chi. And close. And that concludes our practice and instruction for today. Shusha. Thank you for joining me on the path to radiant health, long life, and a peaceful, happy heart.